We'll start with, like I said, number 2, continued observations about Psalms. And again, if you're visiting, it will help to follow through. After we left Oklahoma Christian, we went to Hartman in Memphis for 3 years. And there was a real struggle. I was behind on some things, and we'd been there maybe a month or 6 weeks, and the associate dean called me in, and he said, we've had a church that has never had this before. They can't afford somebody full-time. Have you led singing? I said, yes, sir. Worked with young people? Yes, sir. And get ready. He said, we don't send our really smart students to things like this, and so I thought of you. Word for word, what he said. If you're in an academic institution and the associate dean says to you, we don't send our really smart students to stuff like this, and so I thought of you. It depends on how you take that. I went home and told Sheila, I said, we have received the nicest backhand compliment that you can imagine. We don't send these academic eggheads that can only talk, in Greek or Hebrew. We want to send somebody kind of down to earth. And so for 3 years, we worked with a church in North Mississippi, which was just a wonderful treat. But while I was in school, my 3 favorite classes, number 1 was communication strategies. And Philip Slate had worked at Oxford on speaker audience, preaching, personal face-to-face, or small groups, and then personal face-to-face, and coordinating those things. My second favorite class was religious teachings of the Old Testament, and my third favorite class was Psalms. And I had never just had the opportunity to kind of take, 4 months just to kind of swim in it and be in it and think about it and just be a part of the process of thinking about how it was written. I mentioned this last week, and here's where we're going to start and end tonight. While we were there, and this was either the second or third year, L.O. Sanderson, who had done singing workshops in my home congregation growing up, came on his 75th birthday and spoke at chapel. And we told you last week we had a copy of L.O. Sanderson and Vanna R. Ray because, again, for some reason we wouldn't sing songs that we knew the same person had written the words and the music. And he came to chapel, and when he finished up, they said, do we have any questions? And I had one. I said, Brother Sanderson, I said, out of all the songs and hymns that you've written, what is your favorite line? He said, well, I need to tell you something first. He said, I had something running in the back of my mind about God's presence, God being with us, God working with us. And he said it just wouldn't quite gel. And he said one night at 2 o'clock, I woke up, and in between 30 and 45 minutes, I wrote the 4 verses to Be With Me, Lord. And he said it had been kind of on the back burner, and I'd been thinking about it and on and on. And he said it was just there. And he said I got up and just very quickly wrote all of the verses out to Be With Me, Lord. He said later that week, a dear friend of mine, I think it's T.O. Chisholm, but he's on the opposite side of the page, he did music, and he said the only time this ever happened, he said, I didn't have to change one note or one word, and the words and the music, he said they just fit together like this. And so he said, I had to go to the telephone and called him and says, when did you write this? And he said, well, the other morning about 2 o'clock, I just couldn't sleep, and I just had this tune running through my head. And so here are dear friends, several hundred miles apart, at 2 o'clock in the morning, they write the words and the music to Be With Me, Lord. And then he said, and now I'll tell you my favorite verse. It's the 3rd verse of Be With Me, Lord. Be with me, Lord, no other gift or blessing thou couldst bestow can with this one compare, a constant sense of thy abiding presence, where'er I am, to feel that thou art near. And then he paused and he said, guys, he said, the 3rd verse of the song is like the front row of a church building. It's there, but it's not used very often. And he said, if I had to do it over again, I would swap the 2nd and the 3rd verse so more people would sing my favorite verse that I have written because it's the one that's left out. If you notice in our hymn book, there's a collection of 3 songs, and there's an asterisk on verses 1, verses 2, and guess where the other asterisk is? Verse 4. And so if you sing that melody, then you leave out his favorite verse of the song. But here I am, about this period of time, also doing Psalms and thinking about how this marvelous hymn book of Israel is put together. And what we wanted to kind of expand on again tonight, and where we were last week, is that David, about 1,000, writes the majority, 75 of the Psalms. And as we're going to see, the idea of the king and the kingdom and the kingship are very important to the Psalms at that period of time, but the Psalms continue to be written for another 600 years. And then you stop and think, there was 3 kings in the United Kingdom, Saul, David, Solomon, and then if we do the southern kingdom, and this is going to go down until the first captivity in 606, the kingdom's going to divide in 931, northern kingdom falls in 721, and you go through this list and you do Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, Uzzah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amnon, Josiah, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah is going to be the last king. And that's when the people go into captivity in 606, the first group, Daniel's in that group. A second group goes in 598, and then the city's destroyed in 588, 587, and the people are in captivity. And the first group come back in 536, and if you subtract 536 from 606, guess what you get? 70 years, just like Jeremiah had prophesied. So songs continue to be written. These later psalms are more like, God, where are you? The city's been destroyed, the temple's been destroyed, and then we're going to have psalms of those who are in exile for 70 years. They're in Babylonian captivity. And last week we mentioned 137. By the waters of Babylon, we hung our harps on the willows, on the lyres, on the willows. They were saying to us, sing to us the songs of Zion. And then there are even some songs after the captives come back. So what I want us to kind of work with again tonight is that when you read Israel's hymn book, then stop and think, and we did this. The very first one is Moses in Psalm 90. Moses is about 1,500. We don't have a lot of psalms written before David. And then from David through the different time periods, songs continue to be written all the way down to the end. So we're going to start, like I said, on number 2. And this we'll go through several of this very quickly. But I want us just to continue to think, how was this hymn book put together? And that's why I brought this, because Brother Sanderson was the editor of this book. And as we're going to see, when you come to the second book, there are 5 books in the books of Psalms, and most people think it is a reflection of Moses wrote 5 books of the law. And so when you read those 5 major books of the law, the editors over a period of time are going to compose these, but like I said, a majority are written during the time of David, but then they'll be collected and preserved by different people through the succeeding centuries. Someone at a point decided we're going to do 150. And we'll talk more about that as we go through. So here's our central idea. Psalms are written over 600 years of Israel's history. And I put except Psalm 90, and that's going to be 1,500. So when you add that, in total, there's 1,000 years of hymnology in the book of Psalms. But by the time you take Moses at the very beginning and then you move to David, we're primarily going to do the last 600 years of the writing of the hymn book. And so what we're going to look at is, how did Israel's history shape the writing of the songs? One of the comments that we made last week is that the books of history tell us what God's people did, and then the books of poetry tell us how God's people felt. And while these events take place over the centuries, and the events that take place that we read about from Joshua through Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, and we have that entire history, then these Psalms are going to be written at different points of time in that history, and they will reflect a wide range of emotions, a wide range of feelings. The books of history, this is what they did. Our books of poetry, this is how God's people felt while this was going on. These first 2 or 3 things are important just for the whole Old Testament, but it'll be true again in the book of Psalms. At the burning bush, God speaks to Moses, and he refers back even to Abraham, and he said, by my name and Yahweh, and there's just vowels in Hebrew, so if you notice, it's Y-H-W-H, and in English we add Y-A-H-W-E-H, but Yahweh is how we typically pronounce that. And at the burning bush, God comes to Moses and said, by my holy name Yahweh, I did not make myself known to Abraham. And God was known primarily to Abraham as El Shaddai. And El Shaddai is the God who is strong, the God who is mighty, the God above the mountains. And let me just add this for a quick footnote. One of the amazing things to me is how much the patriarchs and these early people did with how little they had of the total scriptures. Even with David, remember that famous line? His delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he does what? Meditates day and night. How much of scripture did David have? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and 1 Samuel is about Saul. He only has, at the most, those first 8 books. Job is written at some point in this early time. That's all of Scripture that David has. I'm trying not to be sarcastic when I say this, so please take this with a grain of salt. How excited would most people be to say, we're going to study a whole year on the book of Leviticus, and everybody would be going, yes, let me in. Holiness. Be ye holy, for I am holy. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by what? Every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And look at how little of the rest of Scripture that David had, and how excited he was about parts of it that we're not quite as excited about. I mentioned this. Our son is at the church plant at Heritage, and this happened this last year. Education Director Wayne is leading the meeting at Heritage, and he says, and the elders have asked us to study the book of Leviticus in this particular quarter. How many volunteers do we have? I don't know. I wasn't there. Are there 10 or 12 guys? My son Luke said, Dad, guess what? He said, not one hand went up. And Luke said, I'd be glad to do that. Well, here's an early part of Scripture, and it is from the mouth of God, but just think about how much these people did with how little they have compared to the rest of the volumes of Scripture. The same thing's true with the name and the nature of God. As Scripture unfolds, God continues to reveal himself to human beings. So here we are with Abraham. Leave your country and go to a place that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will give to you children, and through you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And how does he know God? There's a wonderful song, and it's not new now. El Shaddai, El Shaddai, Erkam Yana Adonai, and talks about this holy name of God. All Abraham knew primarily about God, he's El Shaddai. Well, at the burning bush, God says, well, in addition to El Shaddai, I'm also Yahweh. I am who I am. And so Abraham never knew of God as Yahweh. And we've mentioned this in an earlier class, but just anticipate, there are up to 30 different descriptions and names of God through Scripture. As you get down to Daniel and these guys living in Persia and in Babylon, and even the handwriting that comes on the wall, they primarily refer to him as the God of heaven. So the captives 900 miles away from Jerusalem with the temple in ruins will refer to Yahweh as He's the God of heaven. And so, this is why I wanted you to see this, and I'm still under number 1. When you come across the word El, Jerusalem, Israel, Daniel, Ezekiel, anytime you have El in a Hebrew name, it is the stem and the root word for God. And in the ancient East, all around Israel, all the gods had some reference to the word El. Well, in the book of Psalms, the word El is going to be translated God, and I'll show you this in a second. See the word El Shaddai? This is the word that Abraham knew. God is strong. So look at 1:1, and this is important not only for Psalms, but all of the Old Testament, particularly as God's people go into captivity. So 606, somewhere in that period of time, we don't know who, but a decision was made. As we take Scripture into these foreign nations, we do not want the pagans to be able to curse the holy name of God. And so they didn't put Yahweh in Scripture. And so in English, when you come across capital, all 4 letters, L-O-R-D, originally, the chances are really, really strong that the original writer had the word Yahweh there. And the Hebrew writers, out of reverence for the sacredness of God, didn't want the pagans to be able to curse the gods. And that's even where the idea of mascots came from. People were very cautious about letting people know their personal identity and other things. And the original idea of mascots had to do with this, oh, you know the name and you put a curse on them. And so they used mascots to prevent that from happening. How familiar is this? The Lord is my shepherd. And that's just, if you've been reading Scripture most of your life, that's just burnt in our minds. Originally, it would have said Yahweh is my shepherd. And so every time you come across capital, all 4, L-O-R-D, then originally the word Yahweh was there, the revelation at the burning bush, God's holy name, I am who I am, and to protect the holy name of God from people misusing it and taking it in vain, then they edited out Yahweh and put the word Lord there. So I'm under 1:2. Elohim, and you hear the L. Elohim is going to be the word for God in the book of Psalms. And so when we come across the word Lord, typically, unless it's just talking about a lord of the master of something, but if it's referring to God, it will have all 4 capitals. And then when you hear the word God, there's the word El, then the original word there was Elohim. Here's something that's very important. In the first book of Psalms, and I'm talking about 1 through 42, God is primarily referred to as Lord. And that's where Psalm 23 is, the Lord is my shepherd. And again, I think this is editors. These are people who are collecting and who are writing the Psalms. When you start book number 2 in Psalm 42, guess what? For the next 40 Psalms, God primarily is referred to as Elohim. And we don't know why, we don't know who they were. We also know it's the sons of Korah, I think, are the editors of the second book, and we'll look at this later. But this is something, and occasionally there'll be a use of that, but let's use something that's very familiar. The Lord is my shepherd. If I'm just listening to a psalm being read and I didn't get to hear where it was from, if it's Lord, it's either going to be in the first book or it's going to be after Psalm 83, because primarily God is going to be the term that's used in those psalms in the middle. And I think that's going to reflect the editors and the choices that they made. Under number 2, and again, we're primarily just doing the first 3 books tonight, one of the things we need to just keep in mind in terms of context is that these early psalms are written in the rule of kingship. And so you're going to have a lot of references to either God as king or the references to the kings of Israel. And books 1, 2, and 3, and it's not just every one, but they tend to either open and close, and in the middle there's all these discussions about kings and kingdom. And if you notice, in the first 3 books, the word either king, occasionally kingdom, is used 42 times. This is the context. This is what's going on in the lives of those people. And I'll leave you to look at these. On number 3 at the bottom, I want us just to notice some historical references to writers of the Psalms. And so we're going to read, first of all, 2 Samuel 23:1. These are the last words of David, the oracle of David, the son of Jesse, the oracle of the man who was raised on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, the sweet psalmist of Israel. And here starts this particular psalm. The Spirit of the Lord speaks by me, his word is on my tongue. The God of Israel has spoken, the rock of Israel has said to me. Look at these descriptions of David. And as I mentioned earlier, there are so many contributions that David makes to Israel's history. He consolidates the kingdom, the promises made to Abraham, walk the length of this land, and the area that God promised to Abraham, 2,000, is only going to be fulfilled during the time of David. David is going to extend the kingdom to the places of the original promises of God. And so there's many things that David does. However, to my mind, the most significant is the writing of the book of Psalms and the leading of God's people in worship. And here are these wonderful descriptions. He's going to be raised on high. I always love the term anointed, and anointed by Samuel, the sweet psalmist of Israel. And what a lovely compliment and description of the man who's going to write half of the hymns in the book of Psalms. Here's a reference to his son. And what's interesting to me is that, and obviously in our class we're not going to be looking at Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, or Song of Solomon, but look at another biblical description of David's son. God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of, and I did some of this in bold. I'm going to drop down to 3 lines from the bottom. Ethan, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in the surrounding nations. But if you'll notice, in 1 Kings 9:31, we're introduced to Ethan the Ezrahite. And so as you're finishing book number 3, he will write Psalm 89. That will be, like a lot of these will say, a Psalm of David. Well, this will say Ethan the Ezrahite. And Heman is going to write Psalm 88. Every possible emotion that you can feel in a lifetime is found expressed somewhere in the book of Psalms. And we may touch on this later, but just while it's on my mind, I want to mention this. Most of the Psalms, and some, depending on how you count them, up to 30% of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. God, why did you let this happen? The darkest, well, let me say it this way. A Psalm of lament will talk about this is what's wrong, this is what happened, the gates have been torn down, the temple's been destroyed, but we're going to trust in God. Normally, at the end of a psalm, there will be some word of trust after the lament. However, not so in Psalm 88. It is just, bless his heart, he is so depressed and so down, he can't even find a good thing about God to say in this. Okay, girls, this may not mean something to you. Some of us guys at one point or another played 8-ball, and there's been an expression, don't get behind the 8-ball, okay? This won't mean something to some of you, others it will. The darkest psalm is the 88. Psalm 88 this Psalm of Lament is just, he just nearly doubts his own existence. And the significance of that is this, and I'm going to have to struggle to say this, you have to work with me. How many true Psalms of Lament do we have in our hymn book? It's going to be the closest you're going to get is farther along. Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder. What would our hymn book be like if 30% of the hymn book was farther along on steroids? When I read these, and again, if you've never done this, at some point read 5 Psalms a day and a chapter of Proverbs. But when I read these, I think this is inspired words of faith. And God is even to be found in our darkest moments. Hopefully this doesn't happen, but when I was growing up, and even as a teenager, I just had a question mark. I heard some lessons. If you just become a Christian, all your troubles will be over for teenagers. Or, this is going to be the most difficult time of your life. All of my grandparents were aged. We had multi-generations, great-grandparents. I did funerals at 101, 100, 99, 98, 97. So we had a lot of elderly people in our family. And I'm thinking, there are people that have 3 children and a mortgage and have lost their job and are taking care of grandparents. They probably have a little more stress in their life than teenagers do. And I'm thinking, what a cruel thing to tell somebody, the hardest years of your life are going to be and I'm just thinking, you don't have a clue what's going to be happening later. And the book of Psalms are the language of faith for people who are struggling. And as long as things are good and we're doing sing and be happy, that's not the issue. But guess what? That's not going to be true all of life. And the significance of having the hymn book, first of all of Israel, and then of the church, is there is a touch with reality that at some point in people's lives, these are going to be really, really difficult times. I haven't got to finalize this yet, but Lord willing, Monday leaving for Australia for a few weeks. And I've asked our son if he would come and do a psalm, and I don't know what he'll do. I'll still check with him and see. I won't give you the details, but we had from August to April, we had 5 families in a church trying to destroy our nuclear family. I'm just going to leave it at that. We probably spent over $10,000 in trying to keep our heads up. And our youngest was having panic attacks. We're on addictive sleep medication, and the whole world's just going round and round. And our son, as a senior, is so angry, and he's saying, "Dad, I actually want to help my younger sister, but I feel so helpless." And we had been talking about you need to be reading through Psalms. And as our family worked through this, he finally said, "Dad, Psalm," and they switch. He said, "Dad, Psalm 37 and Psalm 73 helped me to get God's perspective on what our family was going through." And because at different times, individuals and families will have Job-like experiences in their life. And if you've been in earlier classes, I just say this a lot. If I hear of a tragedy or a disaster and I'm going to the family, the first thing I literally pray for is, "God, please help me not to be either Eliphaz or Bildad or Zophar." And who were they? Job's friends. They had ready answers to religious problems. And if I go, I'm going to zip it up and I'm going to be there. I'm going to listen. And then if I can do something, I'll do that, and I may not say anything. Sometimes presence is going to say something that words can't say. And Gary knows exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the struggles, and it can be a wide variety of things. But friends, this is what's important. All Scripture is God-breathed and is profitable. And God has equipped us to deal with the really good moments, and there's these psalms of praise and thanksgiving, but up to a third of the Psalms are these laments and just struggling to match with faith and reality and the things that have happened, and that's an important part of that. So Ethan the Ezrahite is going to be the writer of Psalm 89, and this will be at the end of the third book. Heman is going to write Psalm 88, and like I said, I think the darkest of all the Psalms, and my dad would just say he's at the bottom of the bucket. And he just can't even hardly reach up and see that. And if you read these Psalms through your life, as we go through these different seasons and times of our lives, every emotion that we're going to feel as a human being will be expressed somewhere in this hymnology and in these wonderful books. And then finally, Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. In the book of Psalms, he is going to be the conclusion of the second book, Psalm 72, and he's going to be one of the Psalms of Ascent, Psalms 127. So if you'll turn the page, we're going to come back to this. I just want to do one thing on this, and like I said, Lord willing, in a few weeks when we come back, we'll come back and touch on this, because I've asked our visitors when they come in, and some are local and some are coming in, pick a psalm. And one of the things I'd like for you to do as a part of the class, and like for example, Richard Dodgen is one of them, tentatively he's thinking of doing Psalm 8. And whichever psalm that the speaker selects, be thinking which book did that come from? So when you see, and I'm right in the middle, see Psalm book number 1, the summary, 38 of the 41 Psalms are composed by David. When you come to Psalms 2, you're in here, these are the sons of Korah. And listening to L.O. Sanderson and thinking, he edited this little book, I think the editors, and we're going to change the name of God from Yahweh to Elohim. And so when you read Psalm 42 through 72, these are compiled by the sons of Korah. The one we're going to touch on tonight is the book number 3. These are the sons of Asaph. And so you'll find these from Psalm 73 through 89. When you come to book number 4, it's Psalms 90 to 106. And remember, Psalm 90 is Moses. That's the earliest one, 1500. But notice this, 6 of the 7 references to Moses in the whole book are in book number 4. And the primary theme of the Psalms of the 4th book are talking about creation and hymns about God made this. The brooks gurgle, the trees clap their hands for joy, the seas and all this other beautiful metaphors about the eloquence and the beauty of creation. And then the second thing is the early history of Israel. Well, who wrote the book of Genesis? Who wrote about the early history of Israel? It's Moses. And that's what you're going to find. And so if someone does one from Psalm 90 through 106, that's in the 4th book. The 5th book is the longest book of collections. And we touched on these. There's Psalms after exile. Okay, so this is going to be toward the end of the Old Testament. The Hallel, killing of the Passover lamb, eating of the Passover. They sang Psalm 113 through 18. The Songs of Ascent as we go up to Jerusalem, 120 to 134. And look at the Psalms of David. Would the book of Psalms be complete without Psalm 139? Lord, where can I flee from your presence? Even if I catch the wings of the morning, and I'm thinking the early rays of sunshine. Recently I was able to be here overlooking the lake as the sun came up. And the psalmist will talk about God makes the coming of the morning and the evening to shout for joy. And what would Psalms be without 139? And so the editors had a group of David Psalms that are not in the early part, and you'll see those there, and then songs of praise. And as the book closes, it gets more and more songs about praise. I want us to touch on the next page. And here's something I'll leave you to read most of this, but this is something to me that's just really struck a chord. Back in the time of David, there are at least 3 different families that are involved in leading the worship and the singing, but the major family for the next 600 years is the family of Asaph. And so if you look across the top, I put these names sideways, okay? So the first one is David at 1,000. And then Solomon, when they build the temple, guess what? We're going to bring the family of Asaph in to lead the worship as we bring the ark into the temple and we start having the sacrifices. And the same thing happened at the tabernacle and the temple. The glory of God comes in and mankind is driven out for a while. But these next 3 kings are 3 of the best kings, and this is my term. Every time there is a restoration movement, and I love that term, every time we're going to go back and do like our father David did, guess what's the first thing they do? Where is the family of Asaph? And so whether you're with Jehoshaphat, number 3, Hezekiah, Josiah, and then at the very, very end of the Old Testament, Ezra, Nehemiah, we're going to rededicate the walls. We're going to restore the safety of the city. And guess what we do? Where's the family of Asaph? And so when you run down the side, and I did the numbers across the top, then here are scriptural references, and I'm going to leave you to read most of these, but here's my point. Can you think of any other family in Scripture that we can document 600 years of faithful worship to God? Remember, the kingdom is going to divide in 931. The northern kingdom is going to go to 721. There's 19 kings. And how many of the 19 kings are righteous and good? 0. The southern kingdom is going to go from 931. The first groups mix it in 606. There's 20 kings. 6 are good to some degree. 3 of them are really, really good. The majority of the time of Judah, the majority of the kings, and I still just get the shudders, at one point they nailed the doors of the temple shut. And I'm sorry, every time I read that, I just literally shake the chills down. I think, what child of Abraham nails the doors of the temple shut so people can't even get in to worship and sacrifice? Regardless of what's going on around them, regardless of the politics, regardless of the faithfulness, there is one family that every time we're going to do it like our father David does, guess what? Where's the family of Asaph? And so I'll leave you to read those, but I highlighted the people. You'll see, like in 1 Chronicles 15:19, the singers were Heman, Asaph, and Ethan. And again, they're going to write psalms later. Solomon dedicates the temple. We get the Levitical singers. Jehoshaphat, there's someone from Asaph who's going to prophesy during that time. Hezekiah, they're going to cleanse the temple. They commanded the Levites to sing. And then here comes Asaph. And then Josiah, he's the last good king. They get the king. So the people are in captivity. And so here's Ezra, the scribe, going to be coming back to the ruins of Jerusalem, and guess what he wants to have with him? Are there some members of the family of Asaph who can come with us? And so 128 singers return with them. Nehemiah is going to bring another group back, and there's 148 of them. I wouldn't say this to your grandchildren. They'd look at me like I had no idea what I was talking about. The family of Asaph are the Osmonds and the Jacksons of the Hebrew family. Can someone tell me what I'm trying to say by that? If I say that the family of Asaph are the Osmonds and the Jacksons of the Hebrew family, What am I talking about? There are musical families. And it's a genetic thing. It's passed down. And there's nothing like the blend of a family. The Sykes family was doing Westview Boys Home when I was there. They only had 11 kids of their own, adopted 2, ran a boys' home with 85 to 100 boys in it. Mama Sykes could sing tenor, literal tenor. And so all of her girls sang alto. All the boys sang bass, and we're talking about off the bottom of the bass scale. But having a boys' home, they had like the Vienna Boys Choir that hadn't changed their voices yet, so when they sang, then the boys would sing the higher parts, her girls would sing alto, a few would sing tenor. But the Sykes family had this wonderful range. One girl was tone deaf. Bless her heart. I felt so sorry for her because everybody else in the family could just sing like birds and had these wonderful, rich voices. And anytime they got together, the blending of family is just absolutely fabulous. And she said, I talked to her once, I says, my heart goes out to you. And she says, well, I try to sing, but I don't sing very loud. Because everyone else in my family is so musical. 600 years. How did they stay faithful? Worship was a priority in their family. Praising God was a priority. Singing was a priority. These are direct commands. Do not be filled with wine, which leads to debauchery. Imperative command. Imperative, be filled with the Spirit, is an imperative command. And then there are 5 participles. Speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing, making melody in your hearts, giving thanks, and submitting. And anytime I talk to my Pentecostal friends, I tell them the one direct command of being filled with the Spirit has nothing to do with speaking in tongues or raising the dead. It has to do with worship and praising God. And here's my question. If Christ doesn't come back for another 600 years, will there be someone in your family still praising God when he comes back? And a part of what I love the 3rd book of Psalms is that the editors of the 3rd book are the family of Asaph. And when you read Psalm 74 and 79, the walls have been broken down, the temple's been burnt. God, where are you? What are we going to do? And even in the midst of absolute catastrophe, the family of Asaph is still writing and singing songs. But here's our last thought. It's very appropriate, and I'm 100% sold on this. It's very appropriate for us to be asking, will our children have faith? Walter Brueggemann had a wonderful question as well. He said, will our faith have children? We primarily think about, will our children have faith? But he came along and asked, will our faith have children? So in addition to personal families, the other question I think about is, if the Lord doesn't come back, and this is God's call, for another 600 years, will there be anybody from the North MacArthur Church family still praising God 600 years later? And as you read through this wonderful hymn book, then I want you to have some feel for the history of what was going on and what was happening and what took place, which led to the emotions and the singing of the songs. But this haunts me in a good way. I continue to think about these wonderful people and ask myself, in my family, would there be anybody praising God 600 years from now if Jesus came back?